Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So today the topic of our discussion is Neo-Realism, also known as structural realism. We will discuss that theory holistically. What we will be discussing, we will discuss its history, assumption, concept and criticism one by one. So let's start. First of all, we will be discussing its history. First outlined by Kenneth Waltz in 1979 in his landmark book Theory of International Politics. This theory gets its ideological roots from classical realism of E.H. Carr, Hans de Morgenthau and Reinhold Niebuhr. These were all classical realists of their time, and hence the name Neo-Realism. It comes from classical realism, but this neo symbolizes new form of realism, and there is a difference between classical and Neo-Realism. We will discuss that afterwards. There are two branches of Neo-Realism, defensive and offensive realism. But there is one catch here. Kenneth Waltz, in his book Theory of International Politics, talked about defensive realism, and that differentiation of defensive and offensive comes from another neo-realist, John Mearsheimer. We will discuss that. So what's the difference between classical and neo-realism? So let's start. First, neo-realism says that structure of international system is the main factor behind state action as opposed to human nature. Classical realism believed that human nature is the main force behind any state's action. But neo-realism completely rejects that idea and says that structure is the main factor behind state's action or the state's behavior. It's the structure that defines what the state is going to do next. It completely rejects the human nature point of view. Another difference between classical and neo-realism is that neo-realism states vary in their level of power, and it's the level of power that defines how they are going to influence the structure of the system. While in classical realism it was more kind of domestic kind of thing or the internal kind of thing, more dependent on the leadership. Another difference between classical and neo-realism is that states are always rational, concerned about their survival. That's what neo-realism believes. But in classical it was not always like that, because it squarely depended on human nature. That's why it cannot be always rational. But neo-realism says that it is always rational and always thinking about its survival, how it is going to survive in the system. Another difference between classical and neo-realism is that the definition of power. It is quite a contested idea in the neo-realism, but there is distinction between classical and neo-realism on power. Classical realism said that the only power the state can have is the military power or the hard power, but in neo-realism the conception of power is quite different. It also considers soft power as well. So that's why there is a little bit of difference between these two on the definition of power. So what are the assumptions of neo-realism? So some of the assumptions are: neo-realism says that anarchic nature of the world system. It says that the world system is in anarchy. Structure of the system defines the state behavior, as we talked about that earlier. Position of the state is based on its power. What's the standing of an state in a system? It depends on its power, and its power can be both its hard power, its military power, or its soft power. So its power defines its ability to influence the structure. Anarchy pushes them to prefer self-help over cooperative behavior. So what this point highlights is that neo-realism is more pessimistic about the cooperative behavior. It says that there is anarchy and it is not possible that states can cooperate. cooperative behavior is not possible in this system, in this anarchy. States are rational. That's another assumption of neorealism. States look other state as their threats. That's another assumption. I don't think it needs another explanation for that. Absence of morality. So states are rational, that means they are more moral. There is no morality in the system. They are looking about their own benefit, only about themselves. So what is the concept of neorealism? Also known as structural realism, as from the title. It explains that international events in the terms of international distribution of power, same structure. We have discussed that earlier. Challenges the view that arrangement of international system is based on human nature. Challenges the main conception of classical realism. We have discussed that as well. It attributes the security and competition and interstate conflict on the lack of central authority and distribution of power. It says there is anarchy and everyone is looking for their own security. So what that creates is that it creates competition between the states to secure the best possible position for themselves. That's the concept of neorealism. So what are offensive and defensive realism? We will discuss them a little. So let's start. John Mearsheimer, as I said earlier, distinguishes between offensive and defensive realism. He is also a neo-realist. So what's defensive realism? Defensive realism is saying that structure of the system pushes the states to obtain enough power to survive in the anarchic system. What this states is that it says that state obtain that much power that they can survive. They don't get that much power to influence the system. They just gain to survive on their own. They don't want to create enemies. And most of the states pursue this policy. Most of the smaller states pursue this policy, defensive policy. While offensive realism says that great power strives to become hegemon. They influence the structure and makes it such that they get the maximum benefit. And what can be the examples of that? All the great powers are the example of this offensive realism. Rise of China, USA's struggle for maintaining hegemonic power. USSR, what were they following? They were following offensive realism, offensive realist policies. So what's the criticism on neorealism? Some of the criticism comes from neoliberal thought, and the other criticism comes from other thinkers. First, focus too much on structure, ignores social and social basis and limits of power. It focuses more on structure, but there are other factors on the play as well. So that's a criticism on neorealism. Another criticism is anarchy is not an immutable condition. What neoliberal thought is saying is that by the making of UNO and by the making of European Union, all these are signs of cooperative behavior of the states. So anarchy is not an immutable behavior, immutable condition. It can be resolved. So the pessimistic point of view of neorealism is challenged here. States are not the only relevant actors. This point says that there are other actors also playing their main role here. They are NGOs, MNCs, big corporates. They are also there. They are the main players. They are also influencing the system. They are also playing the main part here. So that was a criticism, and thank you very much. You can ask any question in the comments. Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe. If you want more videos like that, give me a thumbs up and a comment. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.